East Ruston Old Vicarage, Golden Jubilee, 50 years since Graham and I bought the house. We bought it with about 2 and a bit acres or something, and I was just looking at early attempts at making a garden when we were only here at weekends.
There were tea and cakes in your dining room, and, the garden was very small at the time, but it was wonderful. It sort of being on the map from then, and then just grew and grew and grew.
Question comes in there. Have you possibly thought of what might happen to the garden when so I say when we die? Oh, well, we didn't like to say that, but that's what you meant. Why didn't you say it?
Hello and welcome to a special and quite different edition of Talking Dirty. This is less of our usual plant-filled podcast and more about a very special announcement that East Ruston Old Vicarage has been working on for a little while. We'll introduce our guests in just a moment, but Alan, I should hand over to you really, because it's you and Graham who have spent a long time working on this top secret news, which we can now allow all of our Talking Dirty viewers and listeners in on.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that, and hello everybody. I think that it's East Ruston Old Vicarage 50th or Golden Jubilee, 50 years since Graham and I bought the house, and I was looking back a few days ago at some of the early pictures when we bought it with about 2 and a bit acres or something, and I was just looking at our early attempts at making a garden when we were only here at weekends and stuff like that and everything. It suddenly amazed me that 50 years has gone, and we both have really been asked for several years as time advances. The typical response is something like this. The question comes in there. Have you possibly thought of what might happen to the garden when
you peg it?
So I say when we die. Oh, well, we didn't like to say that, but that's what you meant. Why didn't you say it? And so we had been thinking about it, and we approached the gardening charity Perennial, in actual fact, and I'm terribly, terribly pleased, not to say relieved as well, to say that they have very kindly accepted our offer of East Ruston Old Vicarage and its garden into their fold after we die.
Which is a long way off. We're all
well, I hope
to
so,
add.
But I don't wish to be inconvenient to Perennial, but I do hope so.
So this is a kind of bequeathment, really. You are ensuring the future of the garden so that, unlike so many great gardens, it doesn't sort of fade out to nothing in the future. Because it's very hard to ensure what happens to it after you've gone without some kind of big organisation.
It is, because when I said relief a little while ago, it's something of a relief, because it's only relatively in the probably last 5 or 6 years that maybe we have realised just how important our garden is, if you know what I mean, because it was our garden and it still is our garden. And when you open your garden to visitors, you suddenly realise there is another dimension to it, and it becomes beloved by lots of other people. It probably becomes hated by lots of other people. But I don't mind about that, because that's as it should be. We shouldn't all like the same things. But when that suddenly occurs to you and you think, well, perhaps I should have more responsibility in what happens to it. And I think that was basically the reason for getting in touch with Perennial.
So in order to fully talk about what this means for the future of East Ruston, we thought we would invite along 2 of our friends from Perennial. One of them is Chairman of Trustees, Paul Rochford, who is a 5th generation nurseryman. What an amazing thing to be able to say of Joseph Rochford Gardens.
Plants go through his flow through his blood, I think.
Exactly, yeah. If you cut yourself in the garden, do your blood run green or something like that, Paul? Can I ask if you have any middle names to share?
Well, my middle name is Paul. My first name is John, and I think the initials were the way they're located was the important thing. So I'm JP, as if you like, the 5th generation of such who've been working in this industry.
Oh, so there's a real family thing back through the names with the initials.
Yeah, it all comes from my great grandfather, who was an Irish migrant, and he came across in 1840, set himself up, got some experience and ended up working for various lords in their gardens, head gardener at various places, and eventually set up his own business in North London, which then, of course, was a village, Tottenham area, some tiny little village called Tottenham, and only actually moved north into Hertfordshire, which is where we're located, around the 1860s time because of the railway system, which was depositing soot everywhere. So the greenhouse nurseries of the time were having a bit of a problem with all the dirt generated by the railways. So they kind of moved out.
Fascinating.
The product was then hauled into places like Covent Garden at the time.
Well, we have one great horticulturalist as one of our guests, and the other also, I'm sure if you cut her, it's sap, gardener through and through. Delighted to have you back on Talking Dirty, Barbara Jean. I seem to remember. If people haven't seen Barbara's two-parter episode, and we'll link to it in the video version, you should go back and watch, because wonderful plants for show and tell. I do feel like it always snows when you're on the podcast, because I've currently got snow in my garden.
Yep, me too.
So if we book Barbara, we bring the snow. We'll try to not do that, midsummer or something for a real shocker. And you're also a trustee of perennials. So the two of you here to, I suppose, represent the charity. But Barbara, you also have known East Ruston as a garden for pretty much its entire history as an open garden.
That's true, because I think I was there, Alan, on I came with someone called Ethne Clark, who was a Norfolk friend.
Yeah.
And I think there were tea and cakes in your dining room, and the garden was very small at the time, but you had a real sort of number of people who came that day. I don't know if they were all friends or if they were from garden groups, but it was wonderful. It sort of being what's the word, on the map from then, and then it just grew and grew and grew.
Well, Barbara, there's a certain sort of coterie of people that have this kind of contact, and it's word of mouth, and it goes from there to there to there to there and so forth, and it spreads out like the ripples on a pond. And I think it probably was the Norfolk Gardens Trust, maybe.
It may have been, because I'm not sure you had then signed up with the National Garden Scheme.
No, I don't think we were. I think that was a very early opening for the Norfolk Gardens Trust.
And there was someone there who had an amazing rose garden. Also in Norfolk.
Shirley Cargill.
That's the person.
Elsing Hall.
Yes, that's right. So
yeah.
There. And it was just magical.
And she was the chairperson of Norfolk Gardens Trust.
Well, that's that. Then we've nailed it.
We have.
It is extraordinary to think about how the garden has obviously physically grown. So much has changed in the world of horticulture. I mean, Alan, obviously you remember that first opening, but what an extraordinary distance you've come in those 50 years, or whenever it was. I don't know how many years you were gardening before you opened.
Oh, no, that wouldn't be 50 years ago. That would probably be between 40 and 50 years ago, because
well, you had to you only had a bare patch of earth to begin with.
Well, as Barbara says, the garden was very small. I'll give you a brief history if you like, and it is very brief. When we bought the house, it had been empty for 3 years. It stood in about 2.5 acres of land, which we gardened at weekends because we lived in London in the week. We then had the opportunity to buy another 19 acres, 17 acres, taking us up to 19 and a bit. And it was, in actual fact, land to the east of us and land to the west of us. And thereafter, we had another couple of bites at the cherry. And our last purchase, shall I say, was 12 acres, I think, because the farmer suddenly said to Graham, we approached the farmer, could we have a little bit of extra land for overflow car park? He said, take the whole lot. We had to pay for it, of course, but, square off your boundary, make it work, make it sensible. And it came at the time when, farmers were very reluctant to sell land years ago. And it came at the time when farming was becoming Europeanized, if you like, because this particular farmer who farms locally with us, he actually also farms in Hungary and Czechoslovakia. And so the whole thing is becoming much, much wider. And so that's why that's how we were able to buy the land at vast expense, may I say, but we bought it.
Well, then you have the vast expense of turning it into a garden, because as anyone will know, I mean, the structure, I know you propagate so much, but there is so much hedging, paths, walls, trellis, ponds, all of these different elements. None of them really come cheap, however hard you try to be parsimonious.
I don't know. Sometimes they do actually become cheap, because one of my
on the scale of cheap to expensive, they might not be at the cheapest end. But...
Well, on my list of one of the things that we did is we planted lots of home oaks, and we took the cue from Holcombe Hall in North Norfolk, and they have an awful lot of home oaks growing there. And again, the Norfolk Gardens Trust helped, because the president, I think, of the Norfolk Gardens Trust at the time was Lord Leicester, Eddie Leicester. And we used to meet him quite frequently, because Graham went on to become chairman of the Norfolk Gardens Trust. And I said to Eddie Leicester one day, could I possibly purloin some of your acorns? He said, help yourself, dear boy. So we went up with some sacks, and we filled the sacks with acorns of the Quercus ilex, the evergreen oak. And those sacks represent lots of our hedges and our outside shelter belts, because they started life as an acorn. And, a plant that, if you grow it from seed, quite often overtakes a plant that's been sown by seed in a pot and then transplanted and so on and so forth. And I proved that by one of our hedges, which is made of home oak. And the whole hedge was, I think, we go back to our old measurements in those days, every 3 foot, you planted a sapling and then an acorn, a sapling and then an acorn. Within 5 years, the acorns had overtaken the growth of the saplings. And the other thing that I found quite fascinating is that, as we all know, being horticulturalists, that every seed is genetically different from its parents. And the variation in leaf size, in particular, amongst those Quercus ilex, was quite fascinating. There's one with exceptionally large leaves. I would love to propagate it, but I've tried taking cuttings and it refuses to budge, but there you go.
It's all those wonderful things that you learn from being able to garden in one spot for all that time. And it's why it's so exciting that the garden can continue long into the future. And Paul, from perennials' point of view, obviously there are already gardens, not millions of them, but a few key gardens around the country that perennial already look after.
That's correct. Yes, we have 4 gardens, 3 gardens at the moment, and some we're talking to. But we've got 3 particular ones, one in Leeds, one near Bury St Edmunds at Fuller's Mill, and one over in Herefordshire, the Laskett. And these have been, again, they're all, if you like, legacy gardens. The way we approach discussing with what we're going to do with such a gift is always to bear in mind who gave it and what we're going to do with it subsequently. It will always be to follow the mindset of the original developer, owner who has put it together. So it's really important from perennials' point of view that continued legacy is part of the whole deal.
And Barbara, I mean, we've spoken to you about the importance of the people behind a garden. So being able to have that legacy continued, and obviously gardens evolve, and I suppose it becomes more of an essence over time than necessarily the direct vision of the people who started it. But it's so important to have that story behind it.
That's right. That's one of the things I love in my writing, is meeting the people and hearing about their love for the garden and the way they've gardened. And that story, Alan, about the sowing this, going and getting the sacks of acorns, and I mean, that's just such a great story, and the view of the sort of long-term aim. You weren't going for ready fixes of sort of getting masses of trees, but just those trees will grow over time. I love that if you're in one place, you can give it time. Which
I tell you, Barbara, it's interesting what you're saying, because we did treat ourselves to an extravagant present. We bought a pair. I bought one for Graham, and Graham bought one for me. And they were London plane trees, and they were in enormous pots that were imported from Italy. And we planted them, and we watched them get smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's a lesson you learn, you see, because here on the northeast coast of Norfolk, we have a very dry climate. We also learned that our water table was 19 feet below the surface. And if you have a big plant with a relatively small root system, because although they come in an enormous pot, as big as a dining table almost, that root system can't take the water up fast enough before it's whipped out the leaves by the almost ever-present wind here. And then having a light soil, well, you learn your lesson.
Yes,
in the end, it's quicker and cheaper.
That's an interesting point, though, because Paul, obviously, when you take these gardens on, and generally the original creator is there to do an extensive handover, you get all of these lessons. You don't have to figure out where the water table is and what plants like it and what plants don't, because as a charity, you're given all of this wealth of information from people who know the garden inside out.
Well, absolutely. And also, generally, you're keeping what staff you can who want to stay, if you like. So you're keeping the experience or a good body of experience with you. So you hope that doesn't go away. It's really important, actually, that continuity is that, and the handover is all part of this kind of system. So, yeah, I would say that generally you do learn straight away. It's not learning on the job, because you've already got that wealth of experience with you.
Yeah.
And the mistakes, if you want to call it that, have already been done. Don't do that. Don't do that. I've got experience. I know. Okay, we're not going to do that.
It's a wonderful thing that Perennial has gardens, because, of course, Barbara, the other thing they do is help people in the horticultural profession.
That's right. I have not been in that position of asking for that help. And I suppose when I first got to know Perennial, it was aimed more at head gardeners of great properties. And, I remember the retirement homes that they used to go to. And it's changed now. It's become such a modern organization where it's addressing really quite different needs to those that head gardeners, and it's spread out to a wider range of people in horticulture. It's not simply head gardeners, it's all sorts of areas of horticulture. In fact, anyone who is involved can appeal to Perennial for help if they need it. And of course, one of the things that they do is they have got health checks. So people, we all think of gardening as being very healthy profession, but there are times when you put your back out or you do something to your thumb or whatever, and you may not be able to work at that time. So Perennial is able to advise and help at that particular juncture. And so I think it's a really lovely thing that you can go and visit a garden and that what you're paying for the entry is obviously helping the garden to continue, but it's also contributing to a wider aim, which is fabulous.
It's quite interesting, actually, because that's one of the reasons we first started opening our garden to the public, I think, was on our first open day. There was our first sort of public open day. I think we had 1,380 people turn up. Wow. And the car park overflowed, and it was chaos, actually.
And not surprised.
Well, it's a bit like being a virgin. You have it once, and once it's gone forever. because we had, more than anything else, the intrigue of what was happening behind these tall hedges and all the rest of it, and people would love to have a look. And it is the snoop factor.
Well, particularly because, as we established in the Thames and Westhorpe podcast, people thought it was a nudist colony. So obviously loads of people wanted to see what was behind those hedges.
Oh, I bet some people were disappointed on that day. But one of the reasons that we chose Perennial, I'd just like to say, is because the way that they look after their gardens. I haven't been to visit the Laskett yet, but I have been to Fuller's Mill, and I've spoken to Annie Delbage there, who is the head gardener. and of course to York Gate. And we knew Ben Preston quite well.
And the wonderful Jack Ogg, of course.
Jack Ogg, of course. Yeah, I think he's taken over. And I'm going again to Leeds to look at York Gate, I think the end of April. I think I'm talking up there somewhere or other. And so I shall go the day before the talk and just have another look. But the thing that I loved more than anything probably is the wonderful upkeep of those gardens. And we know how much of a struggle it is to keep gardens looking nice. And depending on weather, for instance. But I mean, you can weed a garden and it looks lovely for 3 days, and you have rain and sun, and then it's a sea of green again. That's putting it in a nutshell. But no, I just love the way that I mean, basically, you have to say that those gardens have good bones anyway. And you know, they were designed well in the beginning, and York Gate especially so, I think. And the sense of architecture and surprise. And I mean, a garden is not just about growing flowers. It's about so much more. It's about the atmosphere, the way you feel, the way I want a garden to wrap itself around you. Mm. When I first went to York Gate, it just wrapped itself around me. And I mean, we got there reasonably late, and we walked up to the where you pay, and this lady looked up and said, "Oh, it's East Ruston. Hello." Well, that was a welcome to start with, of course, but you know, suddenly the garden just wrapped itself around us, and we just loved it.
Yeah, not a big garden, but just so much to see. I could have spent so many more hours poring over every.
But I don't think, you see, you would know that wasn't a big garden when you're there.
No, it's just amazing. There is every corner offers another opportunity, another piece or many pieces of inspiration. It is a fabulous place.
Can I say, I also think that perennial keeps the individuality, which Paul mentioned of the different owners, of the original creators. And I think that's a really important aspect.
Well, I think you can see that, Barbara, but if you compare Fuller's Mill with York Gate.
Yes. Mm.
You see, I mean, it is patently obvious.
Yeah.
That's right.
And of course, East Ruston is a garden that is absolutely packed with the personality of its creators. And it's exciting. I think for me, as someone who would count East Ruston as one of my absolute happiest places, I have had days when I lived and worked in Norfolk, you'd have like a really full on day, and I would come to East Ruston and it would all sort of just float away, and you would feel all the weights lift, and you would come out of that garden feeling 100% better. Even if you were exhausted, somehow your energy levels would be topped up by a visit there. And there must be,
I wish mine would.
There must be so many people who feel like that about the garden. And of course, possibly for me, selfishly, the most exciting thing about news like this is that you will continue to plant the garden for the future. It will continue to just have this pace of evolution that it always had.
Absolutely. I think, that is the mission. It is the mission. You've got to keep it on track with the original concept. And, because you want the same people to come back and other people to come back and all get that experience that you've just explained so well. And get that out of it. It's really important that continuity exists, and that's what Perennial want to bring to the table. Because it's part of delivering the message of Perennial that Barbara's so eloquently described. Working for people in horticulture. This is their help system, if you like, for those who are less fortunate. And it's really important that these gardens help contribute to that message.
And there are some really unique, or many really unique things about East Ruston. I mean, take the Desert Wash, Alan. It would be a huge loss to gardens in the UK if something like that wasn't preserved and couldn't evolve.
Yes, I suppose it would. I mean, it's but that form of gardening is becoming popular.
Yours is so established.
Yeah, well, yes, that's true. I suppose it is. And we have this rather exciting Agave Montana that's got a couple of flower spikes on it, which I hope will open this year, if only this blessed winter weather would go away. And I think I sort of look back and the cycles of our weather, and it seems to be that once every 10 to 12 years, we have these sort of kind of serious cold snaps. And in between, we have benign winters. Well, whether that will continue or not, who knows? But I think the desert, in actual fact, the Desert Wash, I mean, that is Graham's creation. I can't take any credit for it because that is his creation, and he has moved in excess of 450 tons of local flints and built the raised beds there. When I say raised beds, it's not raised beds at all. It's a landscape. And it, I think, coincided with global warming quite well because we had less in the way of frost than we ever had. But I don't know whether people generally are aware of this, but the Institute of Climatology at the University of East Anglia did a survey in the county of Norfolk, and well, East Anglia really, and they found that to within 3 miles of the coast along the northeastern side of Norfolk, not North Norfolk you can forget because that does get very cold, but the northeast and down the eastern side has the same mean amount of frost days as Devon, Cornwall, Southern Ireland, the west coast of Scotland. And so, it doesn't feel like it when you're bending down in the teeth for gale in December or January. But you have to take that into consideration. And again, you learn because we would be here and in the winter and we drive inland the first thing in the morning and suddenly you get for 4 or 5 miles inland and there's frost on the verges and we hadn't got any at home. Now, how does that happen? Well, it happens because of the maritime influence of the German Ocean, if you like, or the North Sea.
Yeah,
it does make a difference.
Provides you with this amazing planting opportunity, and all the different pockets then of the garden, because you've built all these walls, your walled garden, you've got all of these different places where you can then experiment with different plants, which is one of the reasons it's so exciting if you are a bit obsessed with plants to walk around.
I remember when I was young, I had the cheek of the devil, I really did. And I remember walking around. I don't know whether we were walking our dogs or what we were doing. And it's somewhere within a mile's distance from this house, and beneath a sheltered hedge on the south-facing bank, at the end of March, beginning of April, there was a plant called Dimorphotheca. It's now known as Osteospermum. And there's this huge bank of these pale mauve white daisies with blue centres in full sun. And I just thought, what is this? I hadn't seen it before. So I went and knocked on the door and said, that plant you've got out there. And the reply, typical old Norfolk person, what, you mean that old daisy? So I said, yes. I said, can I take a cutting? Why, yes, you can help yourself. Have as much as you like. You just put it in that root, And I did, and it did. It's things like that. You sort of learn from what other people are growing, even if it is just that old daisy.
I do love those moments when people ask for a seed head or a cutting, or I don't think I've really been brave enough, to be honest, but people sometimes ask it of me. The best
you will be when you want it badly enough.
That's true. The best thing is my Salvia Royal Bumble, because it has all these babies. So if people say, oh, what is that? I love that. I go, hang on a minute. Let me go and offload one of my many babies to you that I don't have room for. Which always makes me feel like, considering all the wonderful plants I've been given from doing this podcast and being friends with Alan, it's my one way of trying to give back on that conveyor belt of plant giving is my lovely salvia. So Alan, in terms of going forward with East Ruston Old Vicarage, for the time being, everything just continues as normal.
Yes, it does. Yes, of course it does. And I think the other thing Paul mentioned, to carry on with the spirit in which the garden has been planted. And I think that's important. But I think one has to face facts that the garden will change after we die. I have no doubt about that. And it doesn't matter whether it goes to perennial or who it goes to or what it goes to. We are ensuring the best future that we can for the garden. But, plants grow and they die and things happen and they get overgrown. I've learned that, of course, one of the things that we did, that everybody does when they start gardening, is you put plants too close together. And I remember there was a classic case of a garden in West Norfolk belonging to the Alhusens, and they had to have, I think in those days it was John somebody from Kew Gardens, I believe, who now lives in Norfolk. Sorry?
John Simmons.
John Simmons, thank you, Barbara. Yes, it was. And they wanted their arboretum to be thinned because it needed it. And he went and said, will you keep this one and take that one out, keep this, and so on. And the lady of the house was appalled because she said to me, he took out all the prettiest ones. But you see, when you have a relationship with Hilliers, as they did, and anything new they had to have, and they just planted it. I mean, the trees were quite wide apart, but even so, it's very difficult when you're planting a tree to imagine it 50 years from planting. It's a different beast altogether.
Yeah. Arboretums so often end up like that. It's almost, they go into it, I suppose also because you never quite know which plants are going to really flourish. So you sort of, you have a go and take them out.
We have the beginnings of an arboretum here. It's where we have our plant fairs. And I think the thing is we haven't planted them probably as far apart as they should be planted. And the reason for that is because we can't water in that area. Well, I suppose we could do, but I mean, it would become a very great chore. There's no water over there at all. And I did say earlier, our 19 feet down is our water table. And so you have to plant at the correct time. And here in East Anglia, that time is September, because you need to get plants in the ground and get their roots moving before the end of the year. So while they've got warmth in the soil and there's enough moisture, if they start to get their roots out, then they are more likely to grow away in the following spring. And if we have a period of drought, they've got to cope. And unless you do that, if you plant in spring, the poor things haven't got a chance. There's another little thing you learn, that's the way it is. That's the way it has to be.
So in the meantime, while, many, many more years of East Ruston evolving under the guardianship of Alan and Graham, and if people want to go and clap eyes on a perennial garden, Paul, we've mentioned them. I mean, Yorkgate, is the Laskett open?
The Laskett is open, I think, just 2 days a week. I'm not entirely sure.
As the newest acquisition, I suppose.
And it is the newest of the gardens, yes. And that is just, they're just sort of getting their heads around it, to be honest. But it will be open more as things develop.
Yeah.
So it will gradually get itself together. So this is Roy Strong's gardens, Roy Strong, and it will be an amazing facility. And it's way over on the west of the country. So the idea is to attract all the people in that area, people involved in horticulture in that area, to sort of come, look, get involved, get the message, and take it back home with them. And the geographical locations of gardens is important. They can't be all on top of each other. Yeah. They've got to be spread out so that we've got a good sort of, if you like, a good spread of areas where we can deliver messages really to the public.
And a bit closer to you, Barbara, we have Fuller's Mill as well.
That's right, just up the road.
Pretty handy.
I was there just a few weeks ago. They had one of their snowdrop openings, and you can see how hard the gardeners have worked over the winter. It just was looking wonderful. The bones were so visible, and of course the snowdrops were lovely too, and beautiful, new buds on things. So it was fabulous, and it's not normally open at that time of year, but because of the snowdrop openings, people can see it.
You just mentioned the bones of the garden, Barbara. I mean, that's so important, isn't it? Because I do hate the phrase that we get in late autumn, when I'm going to put the garden to bed for the winter.
Yeah.
Absolutely loathe it, because there's just so much interest in during the winter. And okay, January might be the dreariest month of the year, perhaps, but if you go and visit a garden with good bones, architecture, look at Yorkgate for the architecture in it. I mean,
yes.
It's astonishing. And I did steal an idea from Yorkgate, I have to say, but I didn't actually steal the whole idea. The clipped blue cedar on the wall.
Yeah.
Looks like blue sausages on the wall.
That's just such an amazing piece of work. And I mean, when you're putting something like that in, to have it in your head, what you imagine it's going to be like in 10, 20, 30 years' time. I mean, it is wonderful. That is wonderful. You're really doing it for the future.
Yeah.
And
Well, I've done the same thing with the weeping blue cedar, which I'm allowing to weep. I'm not clipping it. I'm allowing it to weep, so it looks like a blue waterfall on this wall. But had I not been to York Gate and seen the way they've treated theirs, I wouldn't be doing it my way. And that's a great message that I think gardeners take from one garden to another. And going back to what you just said, Paul, about wanting gardens in different parts of the country, I think the other thing that Perennial does is it does such a great service to other gardens that are open in their area, because it gives, if you like, a garden under the stewardship of Perennial. I think the general public can assume that when they go to a garden that is overseen by the charity Perennial, that the upkeep will be superb.
Yeah.
And it's not in every garden, as everybody knows.
Yeah, I mean, garden maintenance, it's an important element. And, involved in that is the training of younger people. And it's so important that these people get trained and in a sense, move on, because then they can take that skill set and put it into another garden and so on.
And if they've worked for Perennial, that is a very great plus point on their CV.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, the head gardener is going to be a person of significance. Let's put it that way. And therefore, the training that a young person will get out of this is up there. It's seriously good. And obviously, the gardens, the legacy gardens, if you like, are very important gardens. So there's a lot of good experience to be had in that place. So I really see that as a feeder for the industry, if you like, and for people who want properly trained.
And I think the inspiration that youngsters have as well, because I know that at York Gate you now have a sandbed. Now, for people that don't know what a sandbed is, it's a way of growing, shall we say, slightly tender plants in colder areas, and you have about 3 foot, a meter of sand, and then they go into soil, probably gravelly soil at that. But it allows these plants to be as dry as possible at the root in the winter, which is our wettest period, let's face it. And if they have a bit of top shelter, they're not going to need heat. But if they have a bit of top shelter, it allows for plants like agaves, dazzlerians, even various tender yuccas to be grown in other areas. And I think that York Gate is very forward thinking on this. I've heard great things about it. It's what I want to go and see as much as anything again.
Well, I mean, I'd be very interested to see. You talked about weather event, and in terms of every 10 years, you get something that's hit you a bit harder than you would have liked it to. And I must admit that what we had in December caused some pretty serious devastation on our nursery. But I'd be very interested to see how these gardens have stood up to it. My own garden here in Hertfordshire has had a real spanking. And I'm afraid we're going to have to rethink some of what we do, or just accept that every 10 years you're going to lose stuff.
And I took something off a wall. It's a Clianthus, the lobster claw.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it died in this very cold weather, and it had a perennial salvia with it as well. And we took them off, and Ian and I were taking them off the other day and taking the detritus away and everything. And I said, "Look at this! It's a lovely little piece of west-facing wall. What an opportunity!" Didn't mourn the loss at all.
Just rethink.
And the other interesting thing, I think, about Perennial's stewardship of the gardens is that there's a gardens committee that is formed for each garden that has, for example, Fuller's Mill had people on it who had known the garden as it was growing up, and the head gardener always prepares a wonderful report every quarter. And there's a walk around looking at what is succeeding and what is failing. And it's not a sort of prescriptive thing, is it, Paul? It's just a very interesting and interested bunch of people who want to see the garden succeed. And, and the head gardener is always able to explain why something is not happening or why something has already happened. And I think it's a fascinating way of taking that mantle on further that the original gardener has started. I don't know, if that sort of makes sense, but it just seems to me a nicer way than just having one person saying, well, we must do this or do that. There's this sort of interested group of people, which...
Well, volunteers are similar sort of things, aren't they? We have a group of volunteers here in the garden, and for instance, this morning, it's a horrendous morning outside. We've had rain and there's heavy winds and all the rest of it. And they are oiling all the wooden shafts and handles on my tools this morning because, as you probably know, we have a collection of old tools,
yes,
vintage garden tools, and they need to be regularly oiled to keep them in good condition. And so they're doing that this morning. And they've had the luxury of being in my potting shed, which I have to say, rather selfishly, is the only one with a fireplace.
The potting shed of dreams.
wow.
Alan, I've just come back from the Philadelphia Flower Show.
Oh, gosh.
Organized by the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. They had an exhibit there of old tools, quite a few of them European, and it was absolutely amazing. I did take some photographs. I will try and get them onto my computer in some way and send them to you. I love old tools. These were really quite exciting and pretty extraordinary, some of them. I've never seen some of this stuff. I will send you some shots so you can kind of see
them too.
So this guy's obviously an avid collector. I mean, he had a lot of stuff there. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to know his name because there was several years ago, there was an American man. He actually came here for lunch one day, but he used to buy up all the good tools. I mean, I'm talking about D-handle garden forks and spades and things like that, which you very rarely see nowadays. And I said to Graham one day, you realise that all of this is our garden heritage here in Great Britain, and it's leaving our shores and going somewhere else. And that's what started us off on our journey. It wasn't just going to America, it was going to Japan. They're going to Japan and they were going to Germany as well, and Europe in general. But he came here for lunch and I said, what do you do with all these old tools? He said, they go in my museum.
Well, this was a guy with a museum. Maybe it is the same man. I don't know. But I
can't remember his name offhand.
I will find out and let you know.
Lovely.
It was really good to see it.
Yeah.
I mean, just how on earth would you have made stuff like that and thought it was a good idea? But,
it worked at the time.
And if you can't head across the pond, you can always head to East Ruston Old Vicarage for a beautiful display of antique garden tools, a little bit closer to home. Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today to be part of this exciting announcement. It's been a hard one to sit on, and I've not even known about it as long as Alan and Graham. So I don't know how you've managed to keep a hat on it, but well done for building it up. Big drum roll, and now we can all sort of rest easy about the future of one of our absolute favourite gardens.
Well, the funny thing is, I did just mention on the radio, I do a radio programme every week, and I did just mention on the radio there will be an announcement made about East Ruston early this year. So keep an eye out. And the amount of people, what's the announcement? The building up that anticipation has really worked.
So you're generating stuff on the back of this, Alan. Well done.
Alan, no stranger to building anticipation.
No.
Paul, Barbara, it's been an absolute joy. Thank you very much. Of course, if people want to go and find out more about Perennial, on the website, there's all the information about the gardens, the work they do supporting service users, and how people can get involved and support what is such an excellent horticultural charity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Until next time, which might be a little while. This is probably our final podcast for a bit. We will
Maybe ask why.
Why could it possibly be? Hopefully a baby will appear at some point. If not, I've just eaten a lot of pies. We we will reconvene at some point in the near future. But thank you for watching. If you've missed any of them, they're all there on YouTube or in all the audio podcasty places to go back. Plant lists on the website, etc. So plenty of stuff. In fact, one of my things for maternity leave is to try and rewatch some of the podcasts, because I've forgotten all of the wonderful plants and lessons that we've learned over the past few years. So hopefully that'll keep me busy if nothing else does. Until next time, happy gardening, everybody.
Happy gardening.
Bye. Hello.
Oh, hello.
Oh, you look pretty and floral.
I've gone very floral. There aren't that many clothes that fit me.
Just to be clear, this morning we're obviously in the presence of greatness because Barbara's name was on the International Influential Women in Horticulture of Mystery. I'm not quite sure which way to put that list in Horticulture Week.
Can you not sort of have a baby emergency before that?
Can you imagine? That'd be a great story, though, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it just? Yeah.
Go to labour while
would be looking on how to deliver a baby by internet.
Has anyone yet had to deliver a baby over Zoom?
Yeah. There was Zoom.
There's always a first.
Sure.
One thing's for sure, you wouldn't want too many visuals. So turn the camera off. I'm getting great blooper material here. I'm delighted.